Hello everyone and welcome. It's Marika here today and I'm so thrilled to be as a guest here at Wplus9. Ever since I started crafting, Wplus9 has been one of my favorite stamp companies. I just love their stamps and designs, and one of my biggest inspiration for coloring has been Dawn and her amazing watercoloring tutorials. That said, it is probably all very clear that I'm so honored to be asked to guest here on their channel and to share a card of my own. Thank you, Dawn, and everyone else over at Wplus9 for this wonderful opportunity. Wplus9 has so many amazing stamps that it was quite hard to choose what to use. I chose to use one of my all-time favorite stamp sets, which is called Flora and Fauna 2, and I combined it to one of their newer stamp sets called Radunculus, a beautiful bouquet of flowers. I went with my favorite coloring medium, no-line coloring with Copic markers combined colored pencils. I started with stamping the flower bouquet from Radunculus set with Hayride Pure Color ink from Wplus9 onto a smooth cardstock. I usually always use Canson Bristol smooth cardstock if I'm doing Copic coloring. I love the paper since it's really smooth and white, and it works very well with Copics, but it handles very well the details with colored pencils as well. But you can use whatever smooth cardstock you have found working best for you. I also stamped the Hummingbird with the same Hayride ink and added the base layer with Copic markers. In this tutorial, I'm showing you how I colored the Hummingbird. I totally skipped the flower in this video, but if you wish to see how I colored the flower, I have another tutorial only on coloring the Radunculus. I also skipped the Copic part of this Hummingbird since there isn't anything really fancy in that coloring. I hardly did any blending and you can basically see the whole coloring here. What I do with Copics, I add the base layer, a very loose and sketchy base layer. I sketch in the main colors and some of the main shadows. One thing that I tried to keep in mind was to add my Copic strokes also in the direction of the feathers of this cute hummingbird. By doing that, you can achieve more realism and dimension to your coloring. Oh, and if you are interested in the exact colors, I list all the colors that I used in the supply list, which is found over at Wplus9 blog. But let's talk about a little bit of adding details with your pencils. When I color animals, the most important part is the eye, so I usually start with it. This also applies to any other image you color. You need to have the part that draws the attention to be really sharp and well made. If you mess up on the other areas, it is not so important if your main focal point is in focus. I usually like to compare coloring to taking pictures, and this applies here as well. If you take a photo of anybody really and you miss focusing his or her eyes, the whole picture looks like that it is out of focus, although the almost all other areas are actually in focus. Same applies here. When starting to color of an image, try to think which part is the main focal point, which part is the first place a person looks at, and concentrate to make that part well. For example, if we look at this hummingbird here, I'd say when a person looks at this bird here, I'd say the eye is the focal point. After the eye, a person probably looks at the beak and then its neck and then its wings. That's just my opinion, and based on that, I mainly concentrated to make those parts to look good and added enough contrast to them. Also, a few words on coloring the eye. I'm not an expert in coloring animals or birds, but what I've noticed, if you want to make the eye look real, you need to have the reflection and you need to have variation of color. Although the eye of this hummingbird is black, or at least we want to have the illusion that it is black, I only use true black on the outside edges of the eye. Other parts are colored in with different shades of grays. The same thing applies to the beak. Although we want to have it to look black in general, I only use true black below the beak and above it to give it enough contrast. I continue to go back and forth with adding details. A few words on the colors though. Although I list all the colors that I use, you don't need to use the exact colors. One important thing that I like you to notice is the number of shades to use. To be able to really gain real contrast and depth, you need to use many shades of the same color. For example, I think I used 5 to 6 different shades of brown to color this hummingbird. I usually choose the colors in a way that the lightest color for pencils is just a tiny bit of darker as my Copic base layer. If you look at the hummingbird's tummy, the yellow scene is the Copic marker, and I only added some darker spots to gain interest. Now I turn on some music for you to enjoy the rest of the coloring process, and I'll be back a little later to talk you through the rest of the card. Please enjoy. Hello again. To get some interest in my background, I added a tiny bit of Hayride Pure Color Dye ink from Wplus9 to give the golden backlight glow. As I mentioned earlier, if you wish to see how I colored the flowers, I have another video tutorial or speed coloring video on that. But the method is quite the same as in the hummingbird. After the flower bouquet was colored in, I trimmed my card panel and used scissors to cut the leaves and flowers that are hanging off the side of my card. I left a tiny white border to make it easier for me to cut. Then I used my Misty to stamp my sentiment. I lined my sentiment to its place and picked up the stamp with the Misty lid. I used coconut husk pure color dye ink to stamp my sentiment. I applied the ink to my stamp and closed the lid. If I had mis-stamped a spot, I could have just re-stamped the sentiment and all is still perfectly lined up. Do we just love the Misty? Then I adhered my card panel to card base with strong adhesive, and for the hummingbird I used foam tape and liquid glue. For the finishing touch, I added a few enamel dots from Wplus9 to finish up my card. Just love how these dots match perfectly with the Wplus9 inks. Once again, it's been a true pleasure to guest here over at Wplus9. Hopefully you found my tutorial helpful and it inspired you to take out your Copics and colored pencils and these beautiful Wplus9 stamps. Thank you Wplus9 for having me. It's been a real pleasure and I really enjoyed playing with your products. Bye!